Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tonight is Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tonight I have the pleasure of having some amazing, brilliant individuals on the show. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Someone would like to go first?
Hello, my name is Joey. I'm from the Bihao community of Tolima, Pueblo Bihao. It's pretty much a area in Colombia, South American. I represent, pretty much representing the South American community.
Hi everybody, my name is Eden Jumper. I am a member of the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I live in Hollywood, Florida. I'm an indigenous activist focusing mainly on like environmental rights, pipelines, and queer native rights, two-spirit rights, and history and so forth.
Hi, good evening friends, good evening family. I'm in Miccosukee. My name is Yahalitke, and for the paperwork I use Houston Riley Cypress. And my family is from the Otter family, and that's one of the families that make up the Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. Come visit the Everglades.
Thank y'all so much for being here. I'm super excited because tonight is the first episode of the Native American series that we're doing. Tonight we're talking about who is Native American, what does it mean to be Native American, and we're going to use those questions to kind of lead the conversation. And then next week we're talking about the various conceptualizations of gender within Native communities. All this leading us up to an amazing march. It's going to be January the 18th, 19th? 18th. You want to tell them real quick about it?
So Indigenous Peoples March, it's a movement that we're going to be doing in Washington, D.C. It's going to be a march, and it's going to be the day before the Women's March. And the reason why we're doing this is because there's a lot of stuff going on in Turtle Island, in Semanawak, and Tahuantinsuyo, in Borican, and different areas where a bunch of Native community are suffering. We're put in the past tense all the time. We are erased, we are killed, we are robbed of our identities, we are pretty much oppressed so that the oppressive power can pretty much take our land and disregard Mother Earth, destroy water. And so we're going to be doing this march to highlight issues that we go through, missing murdered Indigenous women, the oppression of the Pueblo culture in South and Central America, immigration. We're going to be talking about the indigenous people that are migrating in the caravan, for example. Not a lot of people know, but there's a lot of Native people migrating in the caravan that are called foreign, for example. We're going to be talking about what's going on in Brazil with the president, just representing indigenous people in North, South, and Central America, and if I'm not mistaken, also indigenous communities in Africa and New Zealand and Australia as well. We've been able to reach out to communities over there that they want to be involved. So this is a global indigenous movement that's going on. I'm really excited. It's going to be January 18th, so catch us there.
Yeah, very, very excited about it. We'll also be attending the Women's March. So it's just kind of this like weekend of just coalition around just granting people their humanity. And it's just super dope. I'm just excited for all of us to be a part of it. So y'all ready to get started? Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Ready? So who is Native American, and is that term even correct or acceptable? Oh, real quick, if this is your first time tuning in, please feel free to post comments and ask questions. Our panel is very, very insightful, and we'll be able to answer anything you throw at us. So, so let's get started.
Well, what I will say is Native American, American Indian, Indio, First Nation, like these are all words that another group of people gave us. We took to that identity nowadays. It really depends who you ask, like, if they're okay with it, for example. My family, we call ourselves Indios, like, it's not a problem, but it is, for example, another community is a racial slur.
Indio, right? I-N-D-O,
yeah,
Spanish
Indio.
term.
It's a Spanish word that just essentially means Indian, but it is a racial slur. We just kind of reclaimed it. Different communities reclaimed it. A lot of people in South America reclaimed that term, but there are communities that do not like to be called Indio, and I respect that. Indigena, like the comunidad indígena, the indigenous community is another word that people have been using, but these are all words that people have used to call us. It's not what we call ourselves. Even like my community, we're called Bihao. That's a word that Spaniards used to call us, and we use it now to call ourselves. Apache is another one that's something that the Europeans call this group of people. The Blackfoot is another one. These are all terms that a lot of groups now identify as, but it was used, they use it now because these groups of people kept calling them that, We can see that with Creeks. Like, there's a bunch of indigenous communities that were called something else by another group of people, and now they use it. Latino Hispanic is a perfect example of what Spaniards used to call, or Europeans use in general to call a group of indigenous communities something else, and now people use it to identify as. So it just happens.
And I feel like I would be like, who is Native American? Like, who wants to know and why? Like, who wants to know? Is it like official people? Like, are they trying to count us? Or like, are they trying to like lock us up? Are they trying to help us or hurt us? Like, why do they want to know too? So like those are important questions too, because like, again, are they trying to help us or hurt us? Are they trying to help us like get reconnected with the land, or are they trying to like erase us from the history books, like Joey was just saying? So who wants to know and why?
So even like the question of who wants to know, that in itself is important.
Because like we look at the history of, for example, the United States and other places, and like because of these oppressive policies that Joey's talking about, like people have had to hide their indigenous identities. And also for like survival, like we're looking ahead to the topics of next week, gender diversity, and even those traditions had to be either like hidden or lost just because of these oppressive political climate that we have been enduring for the past few hundred years. So those are some things I think about.
So you want to go? I have a question. But
I was just saying that kind of opens, and for me when I hear that, I feel like that opens up the more broader conversation around like when you talk about Native people, like how Native people viewed themselves, like definitely before the contact and before the conquest and into modern day, and how, like, I guess like an example, you were to ask a Native American person, like, oh, or like, would you want to be called Native American? And people are more prone to saying, oh, like, call me by my individual tribe. Like we didn't adhere to nation states or these borders, or even view race or like identity how it's viewed today. I guess to where it can be politicized and contextualized and like used against us, to separate and divide and conquer.
So one theme that I'm kind of hearing right now with the three of you is kind of that, not just the terms, but also the conceptualizations, the ways of thinking through just kind of nativeness is very much kind of implemented or highly affected by just European ways of thinking, European kind of standards, right? From the language that people are using, whether it's in English or Spanish, but also even to like the kind of gender expressions and what we consider gender norms now. Is that kind of accurate, do you think?
It's also just in general the culture, because for example, indigenous culture was illegal in the United States till like I believe the 70s, and that included language.
Canada.
And in Central South America, in Colombia, for example, native language, you were not allowed to speak indigenous language until the 90s. The 90s is when they pretty much legalized indigenous languages. And the reason they made it illegal is because they wanted to kill the identity. Because once native people are gone, that's free land. And then you can change the narrative. We stop being colonizers and we start being the first people. You know what I mean? Which happens all the time. You see it right now with the president of Bolivia saying, hey, I look up to the United States, I'm Bolivia, the president of Brazil, saying, I look up to the United States and what they did to the native people. We should have been like that. The caravan that came to Brazil, the Portuguese people that came to Brazil should have annihilated the natives there like they did in the United States. Because native people living on their land is a problem for the empire, the oppressive, for pilgrims, essentially. Because they're living on the land, they're not letting them just take advantage of Mother Earth. So yeah, our cultures were illegal. In my community, for example, the Bihal language died in the 50s, and that's a big problem in our community, and we're trying to revive the language. But there was a linguicide that went on purposely by the Colombian government, where they went to our pueblo and they killed anyone that spoke our language and scared anyone. And then you have the society pressure of, oh, you're Indio, you need to be educated, you need to modernize, you need to leave, you need to become a mestizo, mestizaje, which is something that happens in Central America.
I mean, English term is miscegenation.
Yeah, Joey, can you tell me a little bit more about like the words that y'all are using? Because like that's new for me, and I think it's really important because like those words kind of like I remember you were talking about them earlier, and they kind of really describe the shifting sense of identities that people have gone through. So like, can you tell me more?
Yeah, so mestizaje is something like went on.
Mestizaje.
Yeah, it's mestizo, mestizaje. It's pretty much it's basically okay. So what essentially happened is a long time ago, after the Spanish were kicked out, the government was like, okay, now that the Spanish are gone, we're a new people. We're mestizos. We're all just mixed. Forget being Indian. Forget being Spanish. Forget being black. We're just mestizos. We're a mixed race people. And the reason for that is because they didn't want to talk about the caste system that was implemented in Central South America, where Indios and black people were put on the bottom. Mestizos, which is essentially someone who's mixed with indigenous and white, or Zambo, which is a black person mixed with indigenous. And then on top of that were the criollos, which are like Spaniards that were born in Latin America, that have pure Spanish ancestry, and then the Spaniards that just migrated to Latin America. So this was the caste system. Obviously the Spaniards and the criollos were on top, and you still see that today. From entertainment television, where you see novelas, it's blonde, blue-eyed Latinos representing indigenous, they're representing Latin America, and the governments, they're all white. Why is it that our governments are aggressively white? It's because they're a caste system. You can still see it today. And then the mestizos, which are pretty much the working class, they have a privilege above the indigenous and black communities in Latin America, because since they're the working class, they're not in the pueblos anymore. They oppress people. They use the pueblos because the Spaniards pretty much taught them, like, look, you guys are not Indian anymore. You're better than that. You're better than them. You're more advanced. You're the better race, and that's why we have terms like avanza la raza, mejora la raza, which basically means like to upgrade the race.
And in English, the term is miscegenation. For mestizaje, the English term is miscegenation. And these terms can also change depending on which country you're in. Ladino could sometimes mean it could mean a mixture of black, indigenous, and European within Central America, South America. But these terms are constantly in a state of flux, and they can mean different things to different people. I think you alluded to earlier that to call someone indio, I've always heard it in the pejorative, like in the negative. Oh, or tira flecha, that's the term for bow and arrow in Spanish, or pata rajada. I guess the kind of English parallel would be like slave feet, but it's kind of a dig at this indigenous or indigeneity people. But the crazy thing is that, like we've been talking about it all night, this kind of anti-indigenous sentiment in all of Latin America.
Yeah, in Latin America, it's huge. They don't want people, my family's not like that. I'm lucky enough that I come from a community that has really dissected what it means to be mestizo or indigenous, etc. So I'm very grateful to the community I come from, because my family, it shows, my family is very open about it. They're very proud of being Indios. And they talk about colonization. They talk about Spanish being the colonial empire. They don't call themselves Spanish. Even from like the lightest people to the darkest people in my family do not call themselves Spanish, because that is an insult to them. That's like identifying with the colonizer. My family is very open about that. And so I was brought up with that, fortunate, which is why I can't really relate to a lot of people when they're like, oh, my family does not talk about like indigenous and things like that, because I'm like, my family talks about it. They're pretty open about it. Yeah. What I will say though is I do see our novellas being represented by white people.
Novellas are soap operas. Yeah.
Our television. Let me start speaking English. But yeah, so and mestizaje. But essentially, what happens is in our communities is that you live in a pueblo. Your grandparents, your parents live in a pueblo. There's poverty, third world country poverty, which is life threatening. There's gang violence. There's colonial violence. All these powers affecting the pueblos. So the people there don't have the privilege to keep their culture. Who cares about culture when you're dying of hunger? So then you migrate to the city for better opportunity, where you can no longer wear your traditional attire because they look down on you, or you can't get a job. You have to learn Spanish because the companies there only work in Spanish, and they're not gonna implement indigenous languages because they're trying to convert everyone to have this Spaniard culture. And then you go from the city, and some people migrate to the United States where they become Latino, Hispanic, etc. And it's just this constant killing of indigenous identity, because there is a political plan, which is once we get rid of the Indians, we can change the rhetoric. We have free land. No one's going to be environmentalists once the natives are there, because the natives are the original environmentalists. My family are
facts.
You know, we're always you see the water protectors in South America are from the Mapuche people. They're Pijaos, they're Mushkas, they're Wayus, they're the indigenous community. They are fighting the governments. They're the ones that are fighting. They're deemed terrorists. You open up Argentina news. Obviously, the face of Argentina is a white Latino, but they're still Mapuches. They're fighting the government, and they're labeled terrorists for saying you cannot destroy our water. You cannot. That's where we survive. You cannot destroy our land, and we're deemed terrorists because of it. Even my own family. Our farmers, my grandfathers, my uncles, they were deemed terrorists by the Colombian government because they were protecting their land. Because they were saying, no, you cannot put a company in our land and destroy our environment. This is how we survive. This is, Pachamama, which is Mother Earth. Like, this is our Mother Earth. This is our mother. You're disrespecting our mother. And to this day, you see indigenous people from the north part of North America to the most southern part of South America are the environmentalists or indigenous people. And yes.
Can I comment on that? Like, I'm hearing about, like, you were asking about this whole anti-indigenous sentiment, and like, I hear you talking about how people are criticizing land or water protectors as terrorists. Like, it reminds me of this article that Trudy Jackson wrote recently, and Trudy Jackson is a transgender Dene scholar. And so, like, what she wrote about in this really, like, brief short article was how
What's her name real quick? I can type it in.
Trudy Jackson.
Okay.
And she was talking about how, like, this Red Power movement and this, I guess, sort of like liberation movement of the 60s and 70s arose in America and in other places, spearheaded by organizations like the American Indian movement. And so, like, that was like a climate of, like, Native pride and Red Power, like, coming back into the United States. And she took time to note in the article that as much as you have, like, this masculine and male leadership, like, the women were powerful in that movement but weren't really too recognized. Some of them were abused in ways that were horrible. But she makes a point to, like, point out that the women leadership is important, and that gender diverse people were also, like, holders of that traditional ecological knowledge. So I'm just, like, coming back to the point that, like pride in our indigenous identity, standing up for the things that we believe in, like the earth and our community and our prayers, and that we need to, like, remember that gender diverse people and women are, like, really key parts of this movement. So I just wanted to bring that pride back. Yeah, because we're dealing with a lot of pain here.
Yeah.
But, like, there's also things that we are happy to be, like, thriving with too. So, like, I want to bring some of that balance too.
Real quick, let me read some of these comments because I've been completely ignoring them. I'm so sorry. Out of Race is saying, big problem for my people in Honduras is America's hand is in bananas. And then he's saying, same Indio has been used to describe someone slow in Honduras, at least. Eric is saying, Rojita Soda is a caricature of a native girl in Nicaragua. It's like it's a glass bottle, and it has they depict, it's a caricature of a little native girl, and it has, like, a feather. And it's a very common soda in Nicaragua. Eric saying, Milagro Sola, an indigenous political prisoner in the Tupac Amaru organization, just got freedom. Stand in solidarity. And yeah, one of my professors just tuned in, Dr. Burns. He's done a lot of work with Native communities in the Dakotas. So let me ask you something about narratives. Largely, kind of like the way cultures are kind of constructed are through these, like, narratives that are kind of deployed in, let's say, this country, for example. Pocahontas, a Disney movie, right? Made to be this kind of very just simple, innocent movie. Has been a way of kind of deploying a type of culture, perpetuating a narrative. So when you see stuff like this in the media, what are kind of some thoughts that come to mind?
Just like when when you're talking about, like, Pocahontas, like, that's a very, like, sad story in, like, Native history. I was once in an event where somebody I wasn't presenting, but I was with, like, a few other Native speakers, and they were just talking about Native identity and Native history. It was like educating, because a lot of folks don't know a lot about Native history, unfortunately. And this woman, she asked a question, and when she asked the question though, she said I'm a descendant of Pocahontas and the great Sir John Smith, and she went forward and asked with her question and so forth, and that really like struck something in me, because like how Disney takes it, and just how like the narrative around Native people, in that sense of like the noble savage, the Indian princess, and so forth. It was you have to look at the reality that Pocahontas was a child, that that she she had
12 years old.
Yeah, she's 12 years old, and she was taken to the UK, London, Britain, whatever, and eventually she was converted, and her she was given the different name. I can't remember right now. And then she died there in Britain. That like that's not like a history that you say, oh, I'm descendant of the great Sir John Smith. That's not, or even just saying like I'm a descendant of Pocahontas, and then kind of taking the connotation of like, oh, like their relationship. That history is something to be proud of, when you really have to look at the nuances and the realities, and the reality is, unfortunately, that Native people in North America, meaning like the United States and Canada, because like that culture is completely different than how like Native people exist and like survived in Central or South America. But just like there is that more bigger conversation around like stereotypes, stories, and who we are, and like a lot of people feel that like we're gone, we're not real. Like I don't know, like in my experience, like often I encounter people who are like, oh, like you're a real Indian, like you wouldn't think that that's something that you would experience today, but that is a reality where people say, oh, like like the Indians are still here. I have friends who tell me, oh yeah, like the other day someone was like, oh, like there are Indians still around, before we even jump on to like acknowledging or recognizing Central and Southern natives as Native people. There's just like still that dialogue here in America and in North America around like Native people are still here, Native people still exist.
It's interesting. So kind of like tying two of your points, how terms like Latinx, Latin, Latino, Hispanic are kind of used to erase the indigenous identities, right? When your brother was on the show, like last year, he was saying that oftentimes people come up to him and just start speaking Spanish, right? And I think it's a great way to tie two of your points about how there's just, y'all are still here? Oh wait, you look like this? Like there's this constant confusion, and it's a great way how narratives are just kind of perpetuated and deployed to erase.
And I think about like how that side of like, oh, the American mythology is that they wiped out the natives. But like I look at like how stories can save us as well, because like the way that stories have saved my community is that every day before I would go to school, my mom or my grandparents would remind me that, remember, what they're going to tell you is a lie in school. Don't believe that. Don't believe that bullshit. So like that's some of the stories that help me to survive, help my identity as a Miccosukee person to survive. And so like I think that when the Native or indigenous communities or artists or storytellers are like telling their own stories in their own ways, it becomes even more powerful. So if you think Native people no longer exist, I'm here to tell you that there's the Imagine Native Film and Media Arts Festival telling like cinema stories. There's so much media out there that are Native produced. Enjoy.
And so say that again, the Imagine what?
Imagine Native Film and Media Arts Festival. It's kick ass. Yeah, it's in Toronto. Every October.
Oh wow.
Yes, it sustains me.
Real quick, and I love that point. I want to read these comments. I want to feel like I'm ignoring people. Out of Race is saying Chiquita Banana, it's a banana company, and Dole are destroying native lands and kicking us off our land. What are you saying? Yeah. Moma R. Start are saying, wow, real and necessary conversation. So thank you all. Sarcha Reincarnate, sorry for the mispronunciation. I struggle with expressing my native culture in an environment where Mexican and influenced by Spanish culture is prominent. What advice can you give? Before we address that question, let me just kind of finish reading these. Bamba is saying, I once called my neighbor Indio and he was offended since indigenous people are looked down in his country, Honduras. So I explained about a colonized mentality and how Puerto Ricans celebrate indigeneity. However, there is so many generations that internalize hatred. I guess this person had a lot of internalized hatred is what he's saying. So back to this question. I struggle with expressing my native culture in an environment where Mexican, influenced by Spanish culture, is very prominent. What advice can you give?
Okay, so that's a very difficult conversation because yes, unfortunately in Central South American, our culture is very influenced by Spanish, and not just Spanish, but African too. And I think that's very important because a lot of people think, oh, this culture is colonized, but no, like we have a lot of African culture influence in our culture, and that's something to be proud of. Mexican culture in general, I mean, I love Mexican culture. I think there's a lot of native pride. Most people that I know that are very proud of being native are Mexicans in California, for example, or Chicanos, or etc. They're very much the ones that are leading the conversation of we're not Latino, we're not Hispanic, we're indigenous. The Mexica movement, for example, is one of them. I would go there. I would go to the Mexica movement as a starting point and then branch out.
Mexica. How do you spell it? M-E-C-D?
It's like Mexican, but without the N. Mexica, is the community. It's like, okay, so...
Okay, gotcha.
The Mexica community were the Aztecs, essentially. The Aztecs, they didn't call themselves Aztecs. They call themselves Mexicas. They're the people that spoke Nahua, which is an Aztec language. Mm-hmm. It's the most spoken native language in North America. 1.5 million speakers that we know of speak Nahua. And it's very important to highlight because people often erase native people in South and Central America. It happens in El Salvador, for example, where the president says there's no native people anymore. And there are about 500,000 native people that speak a Maya dialect or an Aztec dialect, for example, in El Salvador today. And yet there is governments that are trying to erase that identity. The people are also trying to erase that identity. So, for example, with that Puerto Rican who told someone that said Indio, I understand why people think that's offensive because look, I met Maya elders that said we don't like that word. So, and I respect that because every Native person is different. These are words that were given to us by the colonizers. There's Native Americans that don't like to be called Native Americans, so I'm like, okay, Native. Or they don't like to be called indigenous, or they don't, I met a Quechua.
I'm one of those.
Really?
I met a Quechua elder who didn't like the word indigenous. She's like, I'm not indigenous, Indio. That's it. And I was like, okay. Hey.
And I disagree with them.
Exactly. So it's
part of this is tough. It's complicated.
And I have a little bit of advice for the person that was asking for help.
Yeah.
Like from talking about like the true spirit and gender diversity things, like that had to go underground, where it had to be hidden for it to survive.
And we'll definitely be getting that to more next week.
I'm saying is, if you got to do it in private, do it in private. Speak the words in your house alone if you have to. Do the dance moves in your living room alone if you have to. If you can, if you got buddies, start a group. But do it, please. The world, the universe, this earth needs you to keep that culture alive. It's depending on you. So do it.
I love that. And I want to come back to some of the things you said that was very just powerful. But let me read some of his comments. Eric is saying, settled colonialism in North America versus settled colonialism in Latin America operated differently and are important to discuss, so thank you. Rixie's saying, Berta Cáceres of Lenca descent, a Honduras indigenous tribe, was assassinated in 2016 defending the rights of Lenca people. The privatization of land and water cut supplies for the Lenca population. And the government wanted to construct dams in Chinese interests. You're so right when you say they are environmentalists. I want to ask, so we tend to, in the United States, we tend to address any type of nativeness as a kind of homogenous entity, right? That every native is exactly the same. So which I'm loving that you all are just really just kind of resisting and pushing against that right now. But that narrative is very much alive. One of these things that I often hear is the important, and this might be an ignorant question, probably is, the importance of oral histories. I'm curious what oral histories, that role that it plays in your tribe and your nations, right? is it something that a lot of tribes practiced, or no, or just kind of curious? Because I have heard that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I just know in general, and like my tribe, we do have like a strong oral history, where we tell stories, and that's really what it is, where it's like telling stories and lessons and things that pass on, lessons and traditions and so forth. Because when you look at kind of like oral history, that's really valuing and centering, voice and stories over like writing, because a lot of Native nations didn't have writing, and so that's how they passed down, their lessons and their stories and so forth. And then nowadays, where like the thing is where you have like, where I guess European Western academia, writing, books, so forth, that's more prized over oral history. That's more prized as being legitimate, more scientific, more whatever. And then you also have people who purposely go and squanch Native stories and Native voices, and there are a lot of things that Native tribes don't have nowadays, because the people who would know those things simply aren't alive anymore, or they simply don't, someone doesn't speak the language, someone, that person, they passed on, whatever. It's like this really complex thing.
I think it's funny because Europeans, pilgrims, they tend to disrespect indigenous people in many ways. They come out as an academic point of view, and they always try to ignore what Native people are saying. So a good example is the Bering Strait theory.
The Bering Strait theory?
The Bering Strait theory, yeah.
Okay.
So this idea that we migrated from Asia on a ice bridge, whatever. Indigenous people, elders, have been saying that that's not how we got here. For the longest time, and scientists have been like, no, like we have proof, and you guys are dumb, you guys are superstitious, you guys think you came from the ground, from the water, from a lake, from a cave, etc. And they're like, no, we came from South America, we migrated north, In my community, that's what we say, that, we come from South America, we migrated north and up and down, and we've always done that, right? And now, if there's a PBS special on Native America, which is really good, actually, they bring in Native Americans, actually, and they work, and it's really educational. They actually listen to Native people in that presentation, in that show, and now scientists are saying, well, new research finds that there were Native people here before the Bering Strait,
wow.
And they migrated north from South America, and it's like Native people have been saying that forever. That's just one example out of the many examples of what Native people have been telling Europeans about our history, and they don't listen to us, and research proves them wrong.
To your point,
I think about like the importance of oral history, that like for me, like the words that we're using in our language uphold reality, and so like that sounds poetic, but literally, like there's the environmental knowledge that the language holds, there's the sense of community, there's our relationships with the planet and the universe. So I think that the importance of the native language is there. Like it ties us into the world and the universe, and how we can relate to that and how we can uphold these relationships. Like it pisses me off that I heard from a friend of a friend that there's an ad agency here in downtown Miami who employs this racist woman, and the racist woman was saying, oh, I don't know why my Miccosukee child has to learn the Miccosukee language. It's not going to help him with anything. But of course it is. So like it is vitally important, like for our sense of the world, for our sense of family, and for our sense of justice.
And I think it goes also hand in hand to what we were talking about earlier. Or the point you keep bringing up is that once like we as Native people, like our stories, our languages, and our cultures are gone from this land, it gives more space for settler powers, colonial powers, Western powers to expand and change the narrative, because that's just another. And also, like that is a thing with like northern tribes here in America, at least. Like a lot of them need to value like their language, because otherwise, if not, then all of a sudden their validity is like gone.
What's interesting? Like, it's tough because I think since I met Joey more, I've just kind of been talking and hanging out with y'all more. It's like it's tough to kind of ignore that, like like the fact that we all kind of look similar, right? I'm like, damn, like it's very like visceral for me, right? And one thing that I speak with a lot of Latinx folks, however they identify, is that they try to hold on to their Spanish as a way of holding on to their culture.
Yeah.
But it's so complex because I get what they're saying. I get it, and in the United States, that's a very political thing to do, right? But then like Spanish is also like the language of the colonizer, like so it's like the tough just kind of tension that I wonder what that. I remember when I first met you were telling me that you refer to people who might be identified as mestizos as like the lost people. And I just been thinking about that a lot lately, about what does it really kind of take for people to kind of begin to get to know, or to begin to maybe identify or push that politics forward.
Yeah, it's okay. So that's something that I learned from a Maya elder. When I went to Guatemala, I spoke to a lot of Maya women, and they were very. I was very grateful that they were teaching me a lot. So this woman, she's from the Cachical people, and she told me, for us, like the Latinos here, which are mestizos, which is mestizo could mean a lot of things. Someone who, for example, is 100% native but doesn't speak the language, doesn't belong to a community, is mestizo.
And by 100%, you mean blood quantum?
Blood quantum. As like they could be 100%. Like both their parents could be Maya, but let's say they went to the foster system and then they just don't care about their community and they go to the capital cities and they just live their life. They're considered mestizo. They're considered mixed race at that point, because mixed race doesn't mean literal mixed race, because there are mixed race natives who speak the language. They're not called mestizos. They're just called Indios, for example. And then there are mestizos who are not mixed at all, and they're just called mestizos because they're not in their community at all.
Yeah.
And so she refers to them as lost people, and I was just like thinking about that, and it's true, because unfortunately there are a lot of Central South Americans who don't know their native history, because their parents are ashamed of it, because their grandparents were ashamed of it, or because, of course, colonial violence is real. Pueblo poverty is real. Like it's to be poor in the United States is such a privilege versus being poor in a third world country. The poverty there is real. My mom migrated to the United States, so I could be born here, right? And that has given me access to so many resources. In Latin America, my family there, I had a younger cousin, and he died. He died to gang violence. He turned 18 and he died. And he was my age. Well, he wasn't my age. He was a little bit younger than me. And it's colonial violence and poverty in pueblos is real. So they don't have the privilege to keep their culture. I'm able to explore my roots, to be proud Indio, but in reality, like people in South and Central America, a lot of times don't have that privilege. They're surviving.
That's tough. So I tend not to really kind of, and I get what you're saying, because it's being in Central America and seeing that type of poverty is traumatic, even just seeing it. All right, but it's also very tough when, like, sometimes comparing like poverty, right?
Well, let me rephrase myself. To have citizenship in the United States is a privilege versus to be from a third world country, because with citizenship you have access. You may not, unfortunately, there are communities, Native American communities, for example, where their reservations are just like pueblos in Central South America. Their poverty rates are equally the same, for example. And so it sucks. Or like black communities where they're heavily policed.
And that's my point.
And poverty there, it's not just poverty; it's also the policing.
It's a lot.
It's a reminiscent of Pueblo culture in Central South America.
And
so
it's definitely like kind of a lingering of coloniality, right? No, I think that's a good. Real quick, Marie's comments come to you. Eric saying, I'm trying to learn Mezquito, the most prominent indigenous language in La Costa Atlantica, that means the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, also known as the Autonomous Coast of Nicaragua, an endeavor I find very near and dear. It's a Creole culture, as well as with Suma and Rama. The relationship, although is hindered with family, self-hate, and a mixture of Asian and African diaspora in my personal family identity, I want to ask the importance of political process of standing in solidarity with indigenous movements and rights to govern autonomously for any Latinx folk trying to claim indigeneity. But mestizaje was a direct attack on native cultures in the Americas, spelled with the KKK. Also by claim, I mean rediscover or fight for. And Bomba saying great conversation, that's needed. Eric saying kind of what he said, kind of what I was saying about poverty and comparison, but you addressed that. All right, cool. You were about to say something. So sorry.
I think it was like regarding the question. Like I wanted to figure out what you were asking better. Like about was it like being indigenous to place or?
Wait, which question?
Before there was the last question.
I kind of went off a little bit, but what I think when it comes to like Latinos and rediscovering their indigenous, like obviously not every Latino is native. Like that's really there are some white Latinos. Now when it comes to self-hatred, I think you like it's hard for like I'm privileged in the sense that my family is proud of being native, so I was able to easily identify as native, and I didn't identify as native growing up. For the biggest time in my life I just identified as mestizo because I wasn't born in the pueblo. It was like
you were born here?
I was born in the United States, and so I wasn't born in the pueblo. For a big part of my life.
By pueblo, do you mean like a space where like?
Okay, pueblo I mean not the capital, not a city. A
okay.
literal village.
Okay.
Sorry, I keep saying pueblo.
No, you always want to make sure.
You know what I mean? And so like my grandparents are from the pueblo, and my mom was born, for example, in Colombia, and she migrated to the United States. And I have a lot of privilege for being born in California, for example. But my family was very open, like, oh yeah, we have, when the census came, I saw, what am I? And I would be like, Mom, what am I? She's like, oh, you're indigenous, just put mixed, because that's how it is in Latin America. If you're not from the pueblo, you're mestizo, And so I always tell people, like, look, it's hard. Ask your families. Your families may be ashamed of it, and if they are, then just look yourself. There has to be work done. It's hard and it's not easy for everyone. Not everyone's Peruvian. They're not everyone's like from that strong Incan background or that strong Aztec background. Or Maya background. Mesquito, for example, that is a small community in the coast, and that's they're there. They're active. They're actively fighting colonialism there. So I would say go back to the community, learn from the elders there. Learn your language is very important. Mesquito is still they have a language there that is still spoken. In fact, at FIU they offer a chance to go and learn the language. So I would say take advantage of that because not everyone has access to their language because either they died. In Colombia, the Muxca community, which is like our the big tribe back in the day in Colombia, for example, there were El Dorado was based off of. For you guys that watch El Dorado, their language died.
Disney movie.
Yeah, it's a DreamWorks movie. Yeah.
Oh, DreamWorks.
Yeah, and it was racist too. Like that movie mixed like Maya and like they just mixed a bunch of Mesoamerican stuff, but like it was based on the Colombian culture.
Yeah.
The Muxca community, and they speak Chibcha, and that language died, and they they have some access to some language like books and stuff like that. But it is hard. You have to learn Spanish. Number one. Unfortunately, you have to learn Spanish to get access to these because these texts are just in Spanish.
And sometimes you have to use the master's tools, right? You have to use the colonizer's tools to fight back. And that means speaking English. That means using certain resources that you have, right? Because you can't really escape ultimately colonialism.
Colonialism already happened, or it's still happening, let me rephrase.
Yeah.
And to be frank, like First Nation people in Canada speak, the native people there speak French and English, and North natives speak English, and South and Central natives speak Spanish, and in Brazil they speak Portuguese. Like we do speak those languages because unfortunately we were colonized by different whites,
So I have a question, and I think it's something that you were alluding to, Houston. And in a lot of our cultures that tend to be oppressed, sometimes oppression becomes part of the culture. And we kind of often we have conversations. We'll typically address some form of oppression, but there are also other parts of the culture. Sometimes we talk so much about oppression that we miss some of the just other amazing things about our cultures. So I was wondering if y'all could maybe speak a little bit to that, things that are like that also are very empowering, that are just amazing, right? Like, can we talk a little bit about that?
Something I wanted to talk about was, I know you and me kind of talk about it a lot, or like resonate, where in terms of like indigenous identity and uplifting, where Standing Rock, the Standing Rock pipeline protests that happened in 2016, the Standing Rock Lakota Sioux tribe against the Dakota Access Pipeline that was going right by the reservation, right through their water source, and they had their legitimate concerns and spark the whole protest against it, like where that was a space and that was a place where indigenous solidarity came from, where there was, on my end, growing up in my Seminole community here in South Florida, I would see like the migrant workers and just, like different folks here down in Miami and Broward, Latino, Hispanic, Spanish, so forth, with, their indigenous features because they are indigenous, like looking like people that I grew up with or that I knew. And me on my own, of course, picking up and being like, those people, they look native. And then growing up and soon finding out, that they are native. But then why don't they recognize themselves as native? Like, what's going on there? And kind of, through befriending, different indigenous people, different indigenous people from like Central and South America, kind of, realizing that the mestizaje, Latino identity and so forth, where ultimately I went to Standing Rock, and there was that unity, that like borders, like fuck borders, like everyone, all these people are native, where a lot of people were like, the face of of an immigrant from Mexico is that of a native person, like the majority of these Mexican immigrants, illegal immigrants or so forth, are indigenous people, and recognizing that, and especially in a time where it was like Standing Rock, was definitely a big thing for native communities in America. It was like, you had people from Mongolia coming through, and people from Polynesia coming through, and then like you're saying, the Aztecs came through. It was this big just time of solidarity and recognition, and we're all one people, and we all, instead of where there's identity politics, and there's we have our things to bicker and skirmish about, ultimately we all have one big enemy,
Yeah, I think that's one of the positive things I've been noticing recently. There's this Inca prophecy, that's the condor and the eagle, where it says during the age of Aquarius, the condor and the eagle will fly together, and during that, there will be awakening with the people, and we'll be one people again. And I think that's very important, and there's a lot of symbolism in that, which is the condor represents South Native people and South Americans, and
the condor, that's a bird.
Yeah, it's a condor. It's a bird.
Sorry, I don't know my birds like that. Yeah.
What? Wait, what? The condor.
The condor.
Wait, what?
It's a bird in South America.
You're talking about what's the prophecy?
Wait, what? It's a joke.
Oh, it's a joke.
Oh, it's a joke. Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's a sly reference to another podcast.
Wait, what?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So, and then the eagle, it represents North Natives and how it will fly together. And once that happens, there will be a true awakening. And like I said, for the longest time in my life, I didn't associate North Natives with us. I would ask my mom growing up, do they know we're native? We're native, they're native. Why are we illegal? Why is it that the face of an undocumented, the face of a foreigner in this country is a native face? Why is that? And you still see that today, where in New Mexico, this native woman, I forgot what community she belongs to, but she walked into a Kim Kardashian store and they kicked her out because they thought she was Mexican. They thought she was a foreigner that didn't have papers.
You know what's funny? I went to Mexico, and
it's a lot.
And I was there, and white Mexicans were like, oh, they're like, where you from? I was like, oh, I live in the United States, whatever. They're like, oh, I thought you were Mexican. And I'm like, no, what you thought I was a particular type of Mexican.
Yeah.
Right? So even then, in Arizona, the law SB 1070, if you look illegal, and I'm using that language very intentionally, then they can ask you for your papers.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. There's a certain look. The white Mexican will not get
they won't
pushed, right? But if I go, oh, for sure, right?
Going back to that,
if y'all go, and I'm sorry, if y'all go, that's the shit that really blows my mind. It's
it's like that. It's like that, and it's just funny. But going back to the prophecy, when Standing Rock happened, and I saw a video of the Aztecs and the drumming and people on a giant Mexican flag, and they were like, the Aztecs are here, the Aztecs are here. That's when it clicked. I was like, we're one people. What am I doing? I'm here fighting for Central South Natives. and ignoring North Natives completely. When solidarity is there, the prophecy is happening. Indigenous people's march is doing that. It's part of the prophecy. The Condor Eagle will fly together. And we're going to continue doing that. So a big part of my activism is uniting North Natives and South Natives. And what's a good positive thing is that when I talk to elders, and elders say, no, we know you're our relatives. We know. We didn't forget. The youngsters may have forgotten, but not us. And to me, that's such a pride thing where I'm just like, wow, this Seminole Miccosukee elder is telling me this. Or when I went to the Seminole Reservation, the Miccosukee Reservation, and I saw a Colombian there that belonged to the Mushka community. I was like, what are you doing here? Like, this is a random place to find another native Colombian. They're like, yeah, they invited me, and I was that's solidarity, and it's constantly there. And people that are not native never see that, but it's always there.
So let me ask you this, because we're talking about solidarity, and I think it's one of the really dope things about what we're talking about, and also the march coming up. The way solidarity also happened with just African Americans that like running away from slave plantations. Right, and in Florida, we know that a lot of them ran and they were accepted by a lot of tribes here. And one of the dopest things you ever told me was your perspective on the African diaspora, about them being people who are indigenous that have also been displaced.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, wow, it just never, like, I knew it, but I never thought about it in that way. So when it comes to like solidarity with other maybe just quote unquote racial groups, what are kind of some like the leanings of like your tribes and your nations, or like their opinions, like, because we definitely see like intra like racist type of stuff.
Well, I mean, like solidarity, for example, like some of the things that I'm reminded of, like, I mean, just even like in natural disasters, like we had a situation here in Florida. I mean, it's not necessarily indigenous solidarity, but just like recognizing the fact that we're all struggling together. The hurricane came and hit like central Florida, and the Miccosukee tribe had to show up for these communities and offer help. So I think like it also works the other way around, that indigenous communities can show up for other communities too. But I just want to share that.
In South America, we have let me rephrase that. In Colombia, we have a rich history of the Afro community there, pretty much blending in with indigenous communities there. So like my grandmother, for example, her grandmother was black, and she identifies as a black woman and an indigenous woman, but people don't believe her because she just looks like an indigenous woman. She has a straight black hair. She doesn't have a curl. She just has straight black hair and she's dark, and that's about it. So people they're like, oh, you're not black, you're just native. But in Colombia, a lot of the communities mixed with black people, and it caused a revival of indigenous identity. It happens all the time. In fact, there was this article I read, and I don't remember what community it was, but it was part of one of the northern tribes in Colombia, where they were dying, and then black people came and started mixing with them, and boom, identity became stronger. And I think that is very important today, because our elders tell us that Africans knew about us before Spaniards even knew we existed. There are elders saying that they came to Central America and traded with us, and that's important to know, because people often say, oh, Africans, they were, Europeans will say like, oh, Africans didn't have an empire, like they didn't have an amazing civilization. Yeah, they had an amazing civilization, so much so that they knew about indigenous people before Europeans did. So it's very important to know that history, and to know that indigenous people and black people are often working together in Central and South America all the time. And I feel like up here we see Latino and Black American solidarity happen, and where there's real unity, and I think that's pertinent of the indigenous and African unity that's happening in Central South America, because Latinos are people that were robbed of their identity, and Black Americans are people who were robbed of their identity, and so there's a common ground there. And I feel like if indigenous people and indigenous Africans were to unite, then Pilgrims would not stand a chance, because we're a community of that love Earth, that we respect Earth. Oftentimes online people will say, well, how do indigenous people feel about black people? And I'm like, look, Africans protect Mother Earth just like we do. Africans to this day in Africa will protect. They see the sacredness of Mother Earth as much as we do. They're not immigrants. They were forced to come here, and guess what? They helped us fight Spaniards and Europeans when we needed them to, and we helped them. And I know there's a lot of anti-blackness going on, but I feel like we need to be reminded of what our ancestors did, which is unite with black people to fight a common enemy.
I love that you said that. So we literally only have like 3 minutes left. It's been a whole hour already. I know this is the same as last time. So if you could kind of say some parting words for the people. Y'all are gonna be back next week, and so in case we missed something, in case y'all missed something, y'all are gonna be back. Next week we're talking about various conceptualizations of gender within Native communities. Super excited about that. So this is not a goodbye. This is we'll see you next week. So if you have some parting words until next week.
I would just like to remember, I think it was Justice Marshall from the U.S. Supreme Court who said that great nations, like great men, should honor their word.
That's hard to follow up.
I don't know. My thing is always just like, me personally, it's always like solidarity, like at the end of the day is where it's at. It's like looking at who it's like who gave us our struggles, who gave us our fights, you know, like definitely we do have a lot to unpackage between ourselves and our communities, but also it's like ultimately like we're all struggling down on the ground while like Western imperial colonial powers are like up at the tip top watching us struggle because these are the things that they gave us. And also and in that, just look at the stories that you're being told, look at the information you're being told. Don't be afraid to, you know, go off track or like go where nobody goes and talk about the things nobody talks about to find out your history, you know, in your past as like a person of color, you know.
I'm actually gonna follow up with a quote as well. This Taino, this Taino elder, his name is Jose. I forgot his last name, and I didn't write it down. But he said, within every mestizo, there's either a dead Indian or an Indian waiting to reemerge.
Oh,
Oh,
damn. Damn. Okay. Wow. Okay. I gotta write that down. Y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope y'all learned something. I think a lot of people did. Just a lot of comments that I missed. Just saying thank you so much for being here. Next week, I'm super excited. We'll be leading into the March, and yeah. So thank y'all so much for being here. See y'all next week. And thanks. Shout out to Ian in the background.